Alright there folks, back again for another video, and it is a new year, and that means a new tier listing video. I did one on the forces of good from the Lord of the Rings back in the day. I say back in the day, it was last year. I'm just going to hide my bookmark bar there, just so it's a little easier for everyone, so I don't confuse you with all the things on my screen. Yeah, I did a tier making video where I looked at the good armies of the Lord of the Rings and ranked them via the rule of cool, as it were. I don't know enough about the game tactically or anything like that to give you any kind of indicators as to why I pick certain armies over other ones. I just know which ones I like, and so that's why I decided to put together these rule of cool videos where I sort of talk through the factions, what I like about them aesthetically, and why I think they rank higher or lower on the lists. And everyone likes a good tier list once in a while, and you can share your thoughts in the comments down below if you would like to do so. So without further ado, we're going to be diving in. What is the rule of cool? So the rule of cool is essentially that I like these armies because I think they're cool, and some armies are cooler than others. And so that's what we're going to be diving into and talking a little bit about here and why I appreciate them. So we're going to be kicking things off with a look at Angmar, as we can see there. You'll see that I've got some tabs open at the top. Hopefully it's not too many to confuse you. But we'll have a look at some of the miniatures that come with each of the armies and all that kind of good stuff as well, and what's available for them, as well as a look at sort of how they sort of appear in the rulebook and all that kind of good stuff as well. But yes, first off, Angmar. Now Angmar is an interesting one because they are an army that when I first sort of saw and thought about them in the pages of White Dwarf and that kind of thing, I was a little bit sort of umming and ahhing about them. I wasn't entirely sure about them as a faction. I thought it was a bit weird to see something like this added into the game. But the thing that really tweaked things for me and changed my opinion on them was playing through the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Rings Online, which is the game which is focused specifically on sort of like telling lots of expanded stories within the world of Middle Earth and Lord of the Rings, and going sort of deeper into different areas of it and all that kind of good stuff. And one of the nice things about them as a whole was that you got to go and explore the northern regions of Angmar in that game. I learned a little bit more about the characters, like the Witch King and all the kind of different creatures and stuff that live there. And then I thought, you know what, I'm going to go back to the rules and I'm going to go back to the miniatures range and see if it's, you know, better than I thought it was initially. And I got to say, I really like Angmar and the kind of vibe that it gives off. I think one of the coolest things is looking at some of these sort of more the named characters that you get essentially when it comes to Angmar and that kind of stuff. So I absolutely love the I think it's the Dwemer Lake is the name of that guy. It is the Dwemer Lake, I'm going to say. Yes, the Dwemer Lake and the Tainted are the two that we've got there. I really love them as models. I think that is a fantastic little set, and I am very tempted to get my hands on these models. I think it'd be really cool. I love the idea of playing the really creepy, weird, evil stuff that exists within Middle Earth that isn't quite tied to the stuff going on in Mordor and Barad-dûr and all that kind of good thing. And so having something like those ring wraiths and stuff to draw on, I think is a really cool idea and a fantastic aesthetic. You also then obviously get characters like Barad-dûr, who you see here, which I think is another really cool way to go down. There's something about having those sort of tried and tested elements of the lore, like trolls, and then having named versions of those being thrown into the mix, I think is really nice. And the model is also pretty fantastic, as you can see there, which is always helpful. So yeah, I think Angmar is one of those factions where you start off going like, do I really want to dive into this? But then you start exploring a little bit more, and you start thinking a little bit more about the paint schemes and how that could be brought to life. And I think you get an army that is a little bit of a sort of passion project for a lot of people, where they see it and they're like, I'm going to put everything into bringing this to life. Like the Barrow-wights are fantastic models. The Dead Marsh Spectres as well, I think, are superb and would be amazing to see brought into the tabletop. They are also incredibly powerful rules-wise, although obviously we're not necessarily talking about that here. But aesthetically, I just think it's one of those factions where you can have a lot of fun with it. It uses a lot of the base stuff that you get from the other orc factions essentially, so Barad-dûr and Mordor and Isengard and all that kind of good stuff, but you could approach them in a different way when it comes to painting them. I think going in and going for that kind of, you see it a little bit in this picture for Angmar, here we go, they've got almost like a bluey green ghostly feel to everything that you get in the collection. You can see it sort of represented in the terrain there as well. I think going for that with your models would be really fascinating, and I also like the idea of using it almost as a basis for playing out a really interesting game based around that war in the north that you would have seen from the video games and all that kind of good stuff as well, but have that influencing the collection of Arnor armies and that kind of stuff, and also the hobbits, because I love the idea of introducing stuff to do with the Barrow-downs and all that kind of awesome ghostly stuff. I think that would be really fun to do. So yeah, Angmar are definitely one of those factions where I initially thought I'm not massively sold on them, but over the years I've started to really view them as a fantastic little faction that I think deserves a little bit more attention. So Angmar for me, I'm starting straight out of the gate with something pretty darn impressive. I'm going to go S tier for Angmar. I just love the aesthetic of them, and I think it's fantastic. I think they've done a really good job with the range, and hopefully we start to see more of it come back through Made to Order and all that kind of good stuff. Although the majority of it's still there, really, and you just get to play around with loads of cool monsters and creatures and interesting characters. And tell a little bit of a side story for the ring wraiths and things that you would get in the game. So yeah, Angmar gets a big tick from me. Next up, this is Barad-dûr. So Barad-dûr, let's have a look at Barad-dûr. So Barad-dûr is that army which is very much focused on either telling, well, you could tell two different versions of him essentially. You could either go down the route of playing it as sort of Sauron's force, essentially, or you could sort of take it as the Witch King of Angmar later on if you really wanted to, which I think is kind of cool as well. Comes with all the awesome Mordor-y stuff in there, but I think the main thing that everybody really likes is it comes with Sauron, and Sauron is a big boy. I don't even know if they do the models for Sauron anymore. I don't even think they do, but that's just a real shame. In general, really cool. I like that you get to play around with stuff like Black Númenóreans and all that kind of stuff. You get all of the ring wraiths when it comes to Barad-dûr and how that comes together, which I think is really nice. I think if you took it down the route of doing it more Black Númenórean-y, ring wraithy, I think that would be really fun. If you're going to be doing it sort of like in the age of the Third Age. If you're going back to the Second Age and sort of playing out that Last Alliance thing, I think going down the Black Númenórean sort of route and then introducing Sauron into there would be really fun as well. So I think there's some fun to be had with it, but I think it's fairly limited. Essentially, I'm just excited about the one character, more or less, when it comes to that army, which I think is a little bit of a shame, I suppose. But I think there's room to do cool stuff with them. I just don't think that Sauron is enough to kind of take it too high up the list. You can tell that by the fact that I've not been overly exuberant about it at the moment, that maybe Barad-dûr's just sort of not up there. I think Sauron gets it to about here, but otherwise I think it's a rather boring force in the main, which I'm sure will make some people go, what are you talking about? But yeah, so I mean, you know, looks kind of cool. I love the look of the Dark Lord Sauron model. I think it's a fantastic set. It would be really fun to have one and to paint it and to just have it on the tabletop, or just to display it essentially, because Sauron's a big bad boy. But yeah, not massively won over by what they've got in the faction as a whole. But I'm sure it will be a favourite for some people. But there we go. You can actually see some of the Angmar designs there. Actually, we're going back to what we looked at. There you go. There's some of the ghostly stuff they were using. Anyway, I've been distracted. So yeah, Barad-dûr, we're thinking around a C. So there we go. Next up, we have the Corsairs of Umbar. Now, we don't really have that much for them model-wise to show off over on the Games Workshop web store, but, you know, we've got the models here, so let's have a look at them. A cool set of models. A fringe faction in many regards, I suppose you'd say. Definitely not one that I think a lot of people have really put their effort into bringing to the tabletop in many regards, but I think it's got some fun bits and pieces in there for you to play an evil force that isn't necessarily based around the idea of playing with orcs. I think that because it's a little bit more of a fringe style faction, that might actually play into its cool factor a little bit more, I think. I love that it's got the Peter Jackson model in it, of course, the bosun, which is really cool. And you do have a plastic set for it, which I think is really handy for those people who want to try and collect it. It's a, as I say though, it's a very sort of focused force in many regards, but I think it opens up a lot of potential for fun scenario play on the tabletop. You obviously get to play out all the stuff with, Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli and things as they sort of adventure around sort of Gondor, trying to get there and fight against the Corsairs of Umbar and all that kind of good stuff. And I think you could have a really nice sort of pop at painting these in interesting ways. I like the kind of movie style with that kind of dark blue and dark purple for their outfits and things. I think that's really nice. And I think it's good to see some alternative evil humans in the mix as well, alongside what we get for the likes of Dunland and stuff. But in general, maybe just not the force that is going to sort of win a lot of people over. And in my mind, very cool, but maybe not sort of taking it to that next level. As I say, I think you could have a lot of fun flavour-wise with this and telling interesting stories, and I think they would be really fun to paint. But as a cool faction, maybe not. I don't think it's as boring as I just want to play as Sauron. So I'm going to put it about there. They're not A tier, but I think because of the potential for them as a faction, oh god, this might be one of these times where I put it in like a line here in C. Evil factions are hard to pick. I'm going to go... no, it's going in C. It's going in C, but it's higher up than Barad-dûr. That will be my caveat there, because it's further to the left, I guess, right? So yeah, we'll do that. I think that would be a really cool idea. Yeah, so it's like a B- and a C+. It's somewhere there for how cool they are as an army. Next up, we are going to be looking at, I believe it is the Easterlings. So the Easterlings. Easterlings as a faction, they are kind of awesome. I love that you've got the focus on Carmel, the Easterling. I think that's really awesome to sort of dive into that and sort of explore that a little bit more as a faction. I think, again, it's really nice to see an evil army that isn't solely focused around the idea of just using orcs and exploring what else was done with the evil forces in the east that came over to support Sauron, and so having them as an interesting faction to dive into and play around with, I think is really fun. The Easterlings are one of those factions, I think, where you would be hard pressed not to have fun painting them, I think. And I think the Easterlings have very dynamic models and there's some really fun stuff in there for you to play around with. I know that we got a few more bits and pieces, didn't we, for the expanded stuff. There we go, the Easterlings. So yeah, the Easterlings of Forge World, because the site is dumb, we're going to have to click on it again. There we go. So obviously we got these Black Dragon Warriors, which are really awesome. We've got the Dragon Cult Acolytes, Rutabi and Brogir, Heroes of Rune, the Dragon Emperor on his throne, which is a fantastic model as well. I think that's just superb and shows off what you can do when you put your mind to it. I think it's one of those factions that a lot of people almost kind of go, it's not the typical orcs and goblins that you're used to fighting. It's very focused on a particular area of the map in Middle-earth. You're not going to get a lot of people fighting against them and all that kind of good stuff. But I think there's just something about the aesthetic that makes them really fun to paint. And as a whole, is a cool kind of avenue for you to go down and explore things in a lore style as well. So I think they'd be really fun to dive into and pick up for the tabletop. Got a good plastic kit, which is always nice. And then you have characters like Amdur here, who I think is fantastic. And as a key thing to this army, when I'm looking at this right now, I am considering buying some, which I think is a massive sort of tick in the cool column for them as a force. I don't think they'd be like massively up there on like an army that I would definitely collect all the time and sort of expand out in a really massive way. But I think it would be really fun to give them a go and use on the tabletop. You know, a cool idea for playing out sort of alternative battles in Middle Earth on the tabletop. And I think that kind of showing from Forge World sort of takes things to the next level. Aesthetically, they're really cool, and obviously you've got these kind of like assassin types and things, which is really nice. I love the gold. I think the gold would be really fun to paint, especially if you went down a slightly more muted look rather than that kind of shining gold and going from slightly a little bit more of a dirty bronze, and then maybe making the red brighter on them. I think that'd be a really interesting sort of way to go with them painting wise. But I think that's a really awesome little set of miniatures that they've been working on Forge World wise for them. And again, really nice set of models there too. Not a force that I've overly played against and or played with, but definitely one that I think is higher up in my estimations than I initially thought it would be, simply by virtue of the fact that I looked at them and went, well, I just definitely want to play them as an army now. I definitely want to collect them and buy some of the models. Could be easy to make a little 200-point warband with them and have some fun on the tabletop. So yeah, I think the Eastlings are going in B. Well done, Eastlings. You get a B from me, which is really cool. So there we go. Fun stuff. Right, moving on. Next up, we have... Let's switch these around. Let's do Harad first. Because Harad are one of those forces that a friend of mine collects and has really good fun with. So that's the Serpent Horde in this sense. So yes, the Serpent Horde. You're going to get your big Haradrim warriors, your poisoned arrows, your Mummakill, and all that kind of good stuff. Again, one of those armies where I think a lot of people will look at them and be like, really fun to see some interesting ideas for painting on these. You could go down the route of painting them very much like the movies if you wanted to, or you could approach them from a slightly different point of view and use a lot of sort of historical touchstones, which would be very Tolkien in a way, I guess, in order to bring them to life to match some other sort of Middle Eastern countries and stuff that you would maybe potentially see in real life. I think they look really cool. They're just not really an army that sort of works for me, as it were. Let's see if I can find them. So here we go. That's Far Harad. So here is the Serpent Horde and Harad in general. Again, nice miniatures. Just they don't immediately grab me. I like that you've got a lot of different sort of textures and styles to work with the models. I like that you could use a lot of different colours. You could step away from using sort of muted greens and bolt gun style dry brushing metals when it comes to painting them, and instead go down the route of painting them in those brighter colours as we were just mentioning. I think that's really nice. I like the focus on bowmen because I think archers are amazing, so having them in the mix is really cool. I think they've got some very good cavalry models as well. I think they're nice. They have some fun characters like the Mumak Mahud there, as you can see, and the Haradrim King is really nice. In general, obviously, I mean, they have the Mumak itself, which obviously is a massive winner for a lot of people. A stonking kit, and one that I know the Perrys were really fun, had a lot of fun building. I think there's even both of the Perrys and Alessio Cavatore sculpted onto the base as dying Rohirrim on this model, which I think is really cool. And possibly one of the biggest, I think it was the biggest plastic kit until the biggest kit until another one came out a couple of years later down the line, which was really nice. So little Lord of the Rings leading the way. I don't think I'd be painting a Mummak anytime soon. I don't think I'm that mad. But a really interesting force that has some cool aesthetic and design to it. Just not one that I think I'd be overly won over by on the tabletop. So look at the Serpent Horde anyway and see what they've got in here. So they did Raza and Delgamar. So you got a couple of cool new characters there, which is really nice. Delgamar's fantastic. I love that model. And then you got the Mummak War Leader, which was some of the additional bits. So you got the Mummak, and then you got all the additional bits that go onto that as well, which I think was really nice. So yeah, some cool models in there, just not stuff that's really grabbing me. A friend of mine obviously plays, doesn't obviously, but plays this faction and has a lot of fun with it and uses it as almost like his sort of proxy saga army at the same time as well, which I think is really nice. I think I don't think they're B, because I don't really think I'd want to collect them, or at least have them in my collection, but they're not as boring as Sauron. But I don't want to collect them more than the Corsairs, so I think they're probably going to go about there. This is more and more making me think that Sauron is going to drop down into that D position on this graph. But yeah, interesting stuff. Yeah, I think Harad sort of about there, which is kind of cool. Next up, we have Far Harad, as we can see here. I actually think I like these a little bit more than Harad in general, mainly because you get to play around with things like the half trolls, which kind of speak to that quirky element of things that I really liked about Angmar when we talked about them at the start of the video. So having things like the half trolls I think is really fun, and the Mahood I think is a really neat way to sort of take things in a different direction with them. I'm not going to spend too long talking about Far Harad, because I don't think that I could say much more about them than we've already said for the Serpent Horde and Harad in general. So yeah, I think it's a hard one. I think they go about here. I think this is the nod to move Sauron down into D and Barad-dûr down into D. I have no interest in them. I'm not playing as them. If I do find a Sauron, I'll paint him, but I'll paint him and I'll think he was cool, but that's about it. So he's going down into D. There we go. And we're going to have Far Harad and Harad there, the Serpent Horde. So yeah, we'll cap it at that. Next up, we're talking about Isengard. Isengard has risen and is burning the trees. So yes, Isengard themselves. This is your Uruk-hai. This is Saruman. This is Grima. This is Lurtz. This is Ugluk. This is the Dunlendings. Everyone forgets the Dunlendings, who are so cool because they're basically Vikings going up against the Saxons, which is really nice. As you might be able to tell, I quite like Isengard. I think the aesthetic of them is really cool. It was really awesome seeing Lurtz in the Fellowship of the Ring doing his cool thing and fighting against Aragorn and stuff at Amon Hen. Then take that to the next level and start talking about Helm's Deep, which, I'm sorry, Pelennor Fields, but Helm's Deep is the better battle. It's just so atmospheric and awesome, and I love it, and I will watch it endlessly. It's the reason why The Two Towers is my favourite film, as well as all the cool stuff that happens with Aragorn and the Rohirrim and all that kind of good stuff. But yes, Isengard are totally up there when it comes to an awesome faction. As I said, Uruk-hai, Berserkers. Who wouldn't like Berserkers? Heavily armoured warrior, elite orcs that have been bred for war, fighting on the tabletop. Ugluk is really cool. You got your siege kits and your big ladders and your siege engines. Uruk scouts, they're awesome and they're really fun and cool to paint. You can get them on the tabletop really quickly. The Wild Men of Dunland, I kind of like them, but I start to love it when we get to this level and we start seeing things like Thryden Wolfsbane, and we start looking at some of the metal kits that came out for them as well. So you've got the Dunlending Warriors, as you can see here, which I just think are a fantastic set. It's such a shame that it's nearly 50 quid for all of those. You can, of course, make Dunlendings out of, Vikings if you want to, and then use some of these smattered around to kind of, take things in the right direction aesthetically. But I just love this kit, and it was one of those kits that I've always wanted. I collect Isengard at the moment, and having some Dunlendings will probably be a really fun way to go. I kind of have been doing like a proper Uruk focus at the moment, or at least focusing in on kind of like Ugluk and Grishnak, and doing that kind of combination and that legion from the War in Rohan. But I think there's something to be said about going down the route with Dunlendings and using them as the kind of focus as your faction. I think that'd be really cool. I think they did some really nice stuff with them when it comes to Forge World as well. Gonna have to refresh the page again because of course we do. So yeah, having the Dunlending Horsemen, again, £31 for two of them, not great. But then you've also got the Harriers of Dunland and all that kind of good stuff. And then the really nice thing about this as well, in my mind, is that you can go down the route of either playing these as your kind of force for Isengard and for the Dunlendings that is fighting in the War of the Ring, or you can take things back in history and you can play out the fights against Rohan and all that kind of good stuff as well. With Helm Hammerhand and all of that. So yeah, I think Isengard are possibly one of my favourite evil factions by a long shot. I don't know whether or not, are we thinking, I think I might need to switch it around. I'm going to move Angmar down to A because I don't own them, but I really want to. And I haven't had a chance to paint them, but they're like an aspirational project. A for aspirational. But Isengard is definitely S tier. Isengard is S tier. We've worked that out. There we go. Boom. Fantastic. Fantastic stuff indeed. Everything breaking because Warhammer Games Workshop. But there we go. Really fun models. I really like that we got the new plastic kit for Saruman and Grima and stuff. And the Scouring the Shard box is really nice as well. But we'll talk about that later. Yes, Uruk-hai the best. Two Towers is the best of the three films. Sorry, everybody. Not Fellowship. And, amazing stuff. Once again, from the folks at Games Workshop for Isengard. Really cool. Really cool stuff indeed. Moving on. I'm going to be talking about Canned. Canned, eh? Canned we talk about this? Canned is an interesting one for me. They came really late in my love of the Lord of the Rings strategy battle game and the hobby. They came out really, really far down the line in terms of White Dwarf and all that kind of good stuff. And again, I saw them and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I like that they've done something a little bit interesting, a little bit different with them. Because you don't really see them in the movies, though, I think it was one of those forces where I was like, oh, I'm not massively sort of won over by this as a faction. I think they have some cool stuff in there. I like the chariots and I like the riders. I like the aesthetic of them in sort of the broadest terms. I like that you can go down the route of playing around with, again, evil humans in a different way. I don't think I'd ever really want to paint them or collect them, which is a shame, I suppose. But I do like what Games Workshop tried to do with the collection and the range in general, and to kind of broaden the scope of what you could do when it came to evil armies on the tabletop. There's not a lot for them, I think, in the round, and I'm not sure that they would really go they'd really feature on my shelf in any way. Again, just not feeling that kind of click with them as a force, really. So I'm not really sure there's much more to say. But yeah, came too late in my life with the Lord of the Rings to like them, and I don't think anything has come out for them since that has made me go, that is a cool faction I'd love to paint, compared to the likes of the Easterlings, which I think would be really fun. So yeah, again, not as boring as just Sauron, but we'll go there for them. Right, now we're moving on to Mordor, represented by Carmel the Easterling there, as you can see. So yes, Mordor as a faction. What do we think about them? So, Mordor, here we go. You get your ring wraiths, you get your orcs, you get all the additional bonus cool stuff that you get if you were playing Mordor on the tabletop. You get your Witch King, you get your big war trolls, you get all the Shelob, you get Gothmog and all that kind of good stuff as well. I really like them as a force. I really like the way that they went with kind of adding in the Morannons and sort of going in that direction. I think is really nice. As a range, you've got a lot of fun things to play with. You've obviously got all the different ring wraiths. You've got the Morgul Knights, the Black Numenorians. You've got your winged Nazgul and all that kind of stuff. You've got that amazing new set for the Witch King on the back of his horse. I love those ring wraiths. Those sort of updated ring wraith models they did, I think, are really fun. And I love that they kind of put a little bit more effort into making them feel different from each other. Not like in The Hobbit. The Hobbit versions of the ring wraiths, the Nazgul, look really bad in my opinion. But there is something to be said about that old aesthetic for them. I think maybe that Jackson and New Line Weta should have probably looked at them, perhaps, and used them as a basis, and that would have been really fun. Because, of course, they used the same aesthetic, and these all got signed off as well, so why not, I guess. But interesting stuff in general. I'm not sure that I'm massively sold on them when it compared to the likes of Isengard, that kind of thing, as like the prime evil force to play as. But there's some really fun stuff in there, especially with the kind of mixing and matching of lots of the Uruk-hai and the Orcs together to create an interesting faction on the tabletop. They did get some fun new models from Forge World, of course, so they got those two, which you'll recognise from when Aragorn leaps off the boat and all that kind of good stuff. And I really like that they sort of expanding things with the War in the North, that kind of stuff as well. You've got Snagat and Grishnak there too, which is really nice to see. So yeah, some fun and characterful orcs that has definitely been built on over the years when it comes to Mordor. When it comes to fitting them into this, I mean, I have a bunch of them, which is normally a sign that I probably quite like them, but I don't. I think, weirdly enough, while I have a whole bunch of Mordor stuff, a lot of it is going to be used essentially to feed into my Isengard army and be kind of like an Isengard and Mordor alliance type force. And I really like Gothmog, of course, which is really nice, but painting him up is essentially just so I can do the Battle of Osgiliath things. Weirdly, even though I own lots of them, I don't think I want to paint them more than I now want to paint Easterlings, which is obviously a weird thing, but I think Mordor are probably going to sit about there in the B tier, which I'm sure will be a shame, but yeah, maybe too generic as a faction to really be up there. Anyway, next up, Moria. And as a fan of Dwarves and Khazad-dûm, obviously Moria is way up there when it comes to a faction. You get the Balrog, you get loads and loads of little fun, interesting goblins to play around with, and there's also lots of creepy things in their faction as well. As you can see here, cave trolls, boom, started to come up with some interesting ways of painting them and wet blending very, very quickly to get them on the tabletop. You get the Balrog, which obviously has a really nice plastic kit and all that kind of good stuff. You get that, this dragon. This dragon may be the one thing that takes them up to the next level. I love this dragon, and I seriously want one, and I am so tempted. The only thing that puts me off is that it is fine cast, and I am so worried that I'm going to buy it and it's going to be an absolute nightmare to put together, which would absolutely break my little mind. Well, yeah, we shall see. You also get really fun stuff here. You get the Dweller in the Dark, which is really nice if you want to go down that slightly more Cthulhu-y, Lovecraftian route with the goblins, which I think is really nice and was a good addition to the expanded sort of detail of Moria as a faction. The plastic kit's really good, even after all of these years since it was first released, with the Fellowship set, which is nice. You've got a really good set of cave trolls that have come out since then. I like that they expanded things and went in different directions with Ashrak and Druzag and pulling on that kind of animal creature element, so you can throw in bats and spiders and that kind of thing. The Goblin Prowlers are a fun little kit. Duburs and Groblog are really fun little models as well, which is nice to see. The Cave Drake is another additional sort of fun monster to throw in there. So it's a melting pot of interesting ideas and aesthetics and designs and fun painting challenges for you to have fun with. And of course you've got a Balrog and the Watcher and all that kind of stuff as well, which is really nice to see. So yeah, I'm a massive fan of Moria, mainly because it allows me to play out fun battles between sort of Balin's company that went to reclaim Moria, and play out the sort of like those early days of Khazad-dûm, where the Durin and all that kind of stuff would have been fighting it out on the tabletop, and and in reality, I suppose, as well. Diving deeper into the mountain in search of interesting things to do and to fight and sell, I suppose, because you want gold, baby. So yeah, really like Moria as a faction. Really fun to paint. Lots of different options in there for going down different sort of routes. I like the idea of playing like a monster style faction with Ashrak and Gruzag, which is really cool. Or just doing legions and legions of Goblin Warriors and overwhelming your foes on the tabletop. Moria, you're going up into S tier. Fantastic stuff. So there we go. We have one left. You can see it there. You can see it here. You can see it everywhere. It is Sharky's Rogues, and this video is already over half an hour, so maybe I should start to cut things shorter here. Sharky's Rogues does a lot of the things that I really like when it comes to playing around with the ideas that you get from Angmar. You're building an army based around a very specific element, a portion of history, or a part of Middle-earth that isn't necessarily explored in too much detail. And essentially in the films, because obviously they didn't play out the Scouring of the Shire in the films, coming to this and building up this, I think, is a really good opportunity for storytelling. And I think you saw that when it came to the Scouring of the Shire source book that they did, where you could dive in and play out this really amazing storyline of when the hobbits return from their journey and then have to fight off against Sharky and Worm, or Saruman and Grima, who have taken over the Shire and made it their own. I really like them ruffian models, and I think they're really fun and interesting to paint. I think that'd be really cool to do. I think there's something to be said about having hobbits going up against men and playing out this little section of war that happened away from everything else. So there's no Aragorn, there's no Legolas, there's no Gimli, there's no Gandalf fighting in these situations. It's just 4 plucky halflings going against whatever exists from sort of Sharky's collection of rogues. A really fun little force that is definitely one that I would love to see played around with in more detail on the tabletop. And I am really tempted to pick up, because as I say, my friend, I think I said in previous videos, my friend plays hobbits and has a little sort of halfling legion that he's been using for our games. And I think maybe picking up some ruffians and doing a really fun little thing with the ruffians and Sharky and stuff, I think it would be really nice to kind of play out a slightly more interesting scenario with him, rather than doing a what if with like Uruk and orcs and stuff like that. Instead, playing with Sharky and his rogues and putting together a really interesting little force to play out some games on the tabletop would be really cool. Maybe I will collect a couple of these miniatures and bring them together to create some interesting models to go up against his halflings. But yeah, it's one of those sets that I think gets you thinking. And would be really fun to paint, because you've got lots of different sort of styles of clothing and dress that you can run around with, and sort of because you've got so many sort of similar models in metal within the sets, using different colours to paint them in different ways, I think would be really fun. It's not the most in-depth collection of models, but I think it's one that would be really cool to dive into and have fun with. And so I kind of think it sits here where it's not as aspirational a project for me as Angmar are, but I think it's one of those factions that would be really fun to paint up and use in games and tell a very, very interesting and very specific story. But there we go. So let's go through this from the top. So yes, Saruman and Isengard, S tier. Moria, S tier. Angmar get to be A, as do Sharky's rogues, also in A. Fun storytelling options there. B, some aspirational stuff there. I'd love to have some Easterlings, so they get to sit in that sort of pocket in the middle as a sort of future project for me. And Mordor, just because I think you've got so much breadth and to go in different directions with them, but essentially they could also be a little bit boring at the same time. So they're kind of like a halfway house between everything that we've talked about in terms of cool and all that kind of thing. So yeah, maybe around B. Corsairs of Umbar, interesting faction that would be fun to paint with alternative humans for you to sort of play around with evil humans on the tabletop. So they sit around C. It would be nice to have a few of them, but not necessarily expand them into a larger army. And then the forces of Harad sort of sit there because I have no real interest in really picking them up, but I appreciate the look and the feel of the models as a whole. And then sitting at the bottom, mainly because I just don't have that much interest in them, we have Canned, and then boring old Sauron sits at the bottom because I don't really have any interest in building an evil force from the Second Age. I want to paint Sauron, but that's about it. And I'm not entirely sure that sort of... I think we could swap them around if I'm being very fair. So we'll put Sauron there because I definitely want to paint him, at least of the Barad-dûr faction. So yeah, not a massively interesting faction. I really want to paint the elves and the humans of the Last Alliance. That's cool. But I'm definitely not going to go down the route of doing the evil side of that. But there we go. That's my tier for the evil factions of the Lord of the Rings, based on the rule of cool. As I said again, doesn't matter about tactics, I just really like them as forces. There we go. As always, share your thoughts down in the comments below. Tell me what you think about these factions. Do you agree with me? Is this the rankings that you would have used? By the rule of cool, what goes up to S? What goes down to D? Tell me down below. I love talking with you guys about everything that you're doing. and all that kind of good stuff. As always, like, share, subscribe, do all of that good business, and I'll be back in another video. Just remember as well, there is also that Ko-fi link down below if you are interested in helping me out and you know, sending a cup of tea my way or a cup of coffee, then please don't hesitate to do so. But it is not needed. Just you guys being here, having a chat and having some fun is the main reason why I do these videos. And hopefully this will stir up some interesting discussion on the tabletop, well, this tabletop war game anyway. There we go. So yes, I'm going to stop rambling. I'm going to look off screen to do that awkward pausing of my recording. As I said, fantastic talking with you guys this year. It's been really, really fun. And, you know, as we move into this new year, hopefully things will grow and we'll get a few more subscribers. And we'll be able to do some giveaways and all that kind of good stuff as well. So yes, fantastic stuff. Yeah. Cool. Tell me what you think about your tier ranking for the Middle-earth strategy battle game. Is this how you'd rank the evil factions? And yeah, with that, I'm going to see you later. Bye for now.